In many ways, as people have already talked about, the discussion on digital divide is one about digital equity, as even if everyone in the world had access to the internet, there would still be inequity due to the range of devices people have. That could include analog as well as digital, and the different levels of skills people have to use those devices. As such, can the digital divide ever be resolved? If so, how? If not, how do we manage it going forward? And particularly, actually thinking about it, how do we support others with managing it, particularly in developing countries and their resource?
Well, that's who can I turn to for that one? Who'd like to answer that?
I'm happy to start off now. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting whether this, it's like a classic kind of academics response to say, define your terms, in the sense of, it becomes a sort of intellectual sophistry to sort of say, well, actually, will there always be some form of divide? That's the reality of life. And is it about there's a continuous improvement piece? I think it kind of maybe links back to a bit to my previous point around, I fear sometimes politicians, for example, think things are done and resolved, whereas actually the digital divide may be something that is never fully resolved. You're always trying to address it in various ways and in various forms, and that's actually could be a reality of just the nature of technological development, but also the challenges that different parts of the world or different parts of the country or different demographics face all the time. So I hope that's not sort of some kind of cop-out answer, but I suppose I'd like to think that I can't see this ever being done, and we'd never need to think about it again. I think that feels quite a clear challenge, because you'll always have a divide. You're trying to minimize that divide and make sure the baseline is always pulled up, or the kind of the median is as high as it could possibly be. But I think that is part of the challenge. You can see from broadband connectivity across the UK. I mean, that's a great example, isn't it? And obviously the last 3% are extremely difficult to provide super fast kind of connectivity, but there are ways around that. We can think about novel kind of hybrid solutions for addressing some of these problems, but to think that is done is probably is also quite naive, kind of short-term thinking as well.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's certainly a challenging and long-term question. Unless anyone has any urgent points on that, I was going to move on. Oh, Sue, tell us, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say something. I mean, yes, we're always going to have inequity, it is, unfortunately we are, but I just wanted to say that in terms of, and I can't talk about developing countries too much, but if we want everybody to have access to something, we need to have it in free public education. I mean, basically it needs to be in school. So if we're going to be developing digital skills and make make available to everybody, we need to make sure that it's made a priority in all schools, and that we train teachers and we support teachers, and we introduce digital education in every country. And that's the biggest sort of social way of bringing something to everybody. That's what I wanted to add.
Oh, thanks. I now move on to, I've got another question here from James Law from Newcastle. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, James, and your question. I think it's a question particularly for Bjorn. So Bjorn.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for not inviting me, but I came through Melanie Grayo, who's part of your group, I think. My question is, I'm a professor of speech and language sciences, so actually it's not directly related to my expertise, but we've been doing some work on telehealth, and so this is interesting area for me. I'm interested in what you've said about game changers, right? And my question is, I'm going to read out what I wrote, sent in a bit earlier on, but it actually goes over what a number of you have said already. But so at the very least, the pandemic has highlighted the social inequalities in access to the internet, school learning on pay-as-you-go phones, children competing with parents for access to hardware, and part of the country with very poor reception, exacerbating geographical exclusion, etc. And you've been talking about this already. Making local authorities the primary supplier of laptops in the UK as has happened over the last few months, in part addresses the easy part of the access question. And I think the physical objects are the easy bit. I know they're expensive, that's not the point though. But how do we get the internet into everyone's homes? And you're right, Sarah, you know, the schools, the schools issue is as important, but it's the same point. If you haven't got people using it routinely at home, learning it, if it's only a school thing, then it's not going to become, they're not going to become digital natives in the same way. It's not the school that's going to be the primary teacher of this stuff, I think. So my question is, isn't it time to stop pussyfooting around the problem and see the internet as a national utility with equal speeds for everyone? So it's an equality issue at a national level, and acknowledge that the only way we are likely to achieve a universal coverage is through satellite delivery of the internet, and nation states should be buying into that. I mean, the satellites went up last year, so it's already started. And I just would like people's view. It's a sort of mega view, but if you don't have full proper access in people's homes, have we got any future? The digital inequalities are just going to persist.
Well, thank you very much for that, James. I was amazed by the potential of Elon Musk's Starlink satellite network, and I was also amazed by the sort of deafening silence that it was met with by all my colleagues on Twitter and the internet. Maybe because it's something to do with Elon, I don't know. What do you think about that, Bjorn? Do you have a view?
Yeah, so I would say I would regard connectivity as a kind of, as a desirable human right. So I wouldn't want to dispute that, right? Now, what is the right technology? I think when you look at people doing this commercially, and the Microsoft Airband initiative is a really, really good example, connectivity is always about a portfolio of approaches. So yes, satellite connectivity is really important, but there's also lots of other types of connectivity. I think realistically, I would say from a sort of technological perspective, really a portfolio approach is the right one. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be using satellite technology or that people shouldn't have access. It's just that when you really do it on the ground and you really look at how fast you can get connectivity into places, like a portfolio approach is best. I'll post a link to the Microsoft Airband initiative in a minute. Now, should everyone have access to the internet right now? Well, yes. But in many low-income countries, you know, there is the opportunity cost of that. And we do know that digital literacy, for example, depends on ordinary literacy. If you don't have basic mathematics and numeracy and literacy skills, you won't actually benefit from the internet all that much. Also, digital learning is not just about the internet. So you look at GeoGebra, for instance, used by millions of mathematics teachers around the globe. You can use that. You don't need connectivity for that. Digital problem solving with spreadsheets, you don't need connectivity for that. So, while it would be nice for everyone to have, say, broadband connectivity right now, I don't actually think that from an education perspective, it is a priority. What I would say is give free, so the slow, we have like 5G, 4G, broadband, fiber, all of that. But, the slowest forms of connectivity are GSM, and so GPRS, right? And like 2G and things like that, Edge, the things that we don't even use anymore. Why not give everybody around the world free SMS and free GPRS connectivity, right? That means you can send free text messages and you can communicate with people about your business needs through WhatsApp. So I would advocate for that, because from a low-income country perspective, that is something that is actually achievable. Whereas if we say everybody broadband now in low-income countries, that's going to start in the cities. That's going to start where there's internet connectivity already. Now, satellite might change some of that. We'll see how kind of Starlink and all of that turns out. That's been tried many times. We'll see. It might work this time. But at the end of the day, it is also about devices for people, and no satellite will make a difference to that. I'm very happy to have more conversations about this. I think it's a really, really important thing.
But can I just come back on that? There's a chicken and egg thing about the mathematical and literacy you need in order to use the internet. And there's been quite a lot of work around self-organized learning, which rather implies that if you give the children, it's true, it's children, right? But if you give the children the tools, they will teach themselves using the internet. So it's not like they need, formal national curriculum type training before they can access it. they instinctively use it as a learning device.
Yeah, I mean, I would respectfully disagree or differentiate the question. I mean, I have a couple of nephews. My sister's a teacher. They're by all means a middle class household. My mother, so their grandmother did the homeschooling for them. Yes, they learn themselves. But actually the most marginalized don't, and especially in primary school, there is a lot of reliance, especially in primary school, there's a lot of reliance on having a facilitator of learning. And actually what we see, even in higher grades, even with radio instruction, TV instruction, it is so important to have a facilitator around. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher, but I think that the idea that children are self, I could go on about this endlessly. I can send you some research and stuff where from low-income countries with randomized control trials and all of that actually show that actually community has a big kind of impact on that. But yeah, we could debate that all.
Can I ask Tom to come in on?
Yeah, I suppose I just there's a couple of specific points. I mean, I think I'd be quite critical about the kind of the myth, the digital native type stuff. It's been quite powerful language that's been used by politicians, but having, I suppose, written part of a national curriculum lately, and also just seeing the kind of the practice in schools in a lot of different settings and contexts. I think you get very superficial and narrow kind of digital competence or competencies. And, yes, they are confident in using technology. I've got a 6-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. They are fantastically digitally competent when they're navigating, watching stuff on YouTube. But I don't think you don't see the transferability of that. And I think we have to be really, really careful about just describing. I think that can be quite socioeconomically driven. I think just on the point, your overarching point around, I think there is some political, ideological stuff there. And I think there's a comment in the chat around, recent, the UK, the Labour Party in the UK had proposed kind of, this being sort of a nationalised kind of public service. I think I recognised the opportunities. I think is it a basic human right? Well, access to information is interesting. The right to education. I think there are some stronger and stronger arguments for this. I'm a commissioner of the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales, and we have a very specific challenge in Wales because of the kind of geography and sort of topography of Wales, and certainly the kind of challenges of connecting everyone from a universal service obligation. That's really difficult. And actually just saying everyone in the UK should have 30 meg downstream, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve some of the wider kind of digital stuff around that. I think satellites are part of the solution, but it's a much more kind of diverse, hybridized solution to some of these problems, I think. But satellite are part, but then you have issues with latency and all that kind of stuff. And actually that doesn't solve all of your problems. But I think, I think there was another point raised briefly before around it's not just about schools, it's not just about teachers, and there's a societal piece. So actually you do need to do stuff with parents, because the stuff in the online harms kind of bill in the UK, or the fact is when schools used to block YouTube, it's futile because they have unrestricted access to the internet at home. Their parents don't know what they're doing. So you do need to address that wider societal piece too.